This evening, we have a presentation by Eric Vartany, and I've known Eric for what, 3 or 4 months?
Mhm.
Eric came to Ahari to check out the archives for a paper or a study he was doing, and we're going to hear about the findings this evening. Let me see, what else can I say about you, Eric? You're a freshman and at Brown, and you're majoring right now in mechanical engineering. No, is it mechanical
Yes.
engineering and urban studies?
Yeah. Thank you so much for the introduction. Let me share my screen. Um, Although I'm studying mechanical engineering, I'm also diving into urban studies, which for those that don't know is I like to. It's like a subsection of sociology, but specifically in urban areas and understanding how different communities play in an urban environment. So for this study, I was focusing in on the Armenian community of Providence because I thought it's particularly interesting how a community that's been here for over 130 years at this point has been able to stay connected to their Armenian heritage. Um, and specifically, I've been focusing in on what the role of the Armenian Church has played into fostering this community and understanding how other communities have also been centered around the Armenian Church or around their religious institutions. For some background, I'm from Los Angeles, so a bit away from Providence, but I've been pretty involved with the Armenian community over there. I've been very involved with going to Armenia in the summers to immerse myself in Armenian culture. The one thing that I hadn't really been involved with in Los Angeles is any sort of Armenian church activities. My family has always been pretty like non-religious in terms of like going to Patarak or anything like that. Or like we always like have like Easter dinner and all that sort of traditional stuff. But in terms of religion, it's always been a little quieter in my family. So specifically when I came to Providence, I was curious with how in a smaller community compared to Los Angeles, how religion has played a role in being like the center of an Armenian community. Um, so let me dive in first into what I mean by the Armenian church as a third place. So I'm not talking about like a bronze medal in any sort of sense. Third place in urban studies refers to a location that's not your first place, which is referred to as like your home area, or the second place, which is where you work. But a third place is where you spend your time outside of those locations, where you're searching for leisure, community, anything that gives you some more, like I guess, excitement or connection to a broader environment than what you're used to. So traditionally in urban studies, a lot of people refer to a third place as maybe a park, a gym, or a cafe in a way where it's a place that you go to spend your time after work, connect with other people that you normally wouldn't interact with either at home or work. And third places are really important because they structure an environment for people to connect with people of like different backgrounds. So the main example that people give with third places are like the main example is like the like British pub, for example, where after work you go to the pub, you meet new people of different backgrounds, but you spend time with your friends. And specifically, people in urban studies focus on this as an example of why European culture seems a little more cohesive than in America, where people refer to American society as very disconnected, specifically because of like the way that our cities are designed. For example, that you have to drive everywhere, especially in like a place like California, where you're not able to walk to the pub, meet new people, and then walk back to your home. So in that case, like a pub is a great example of building a community with your local neighborhood. Um, But as I made my transition to Providence, I noticed the intersection between my interest in urban studies and my passion for Armenia with the third place that I noticed of the Armenian church, where the Armenian church is the perfect example of why, of a third place, because you have people from all across Rhode Island coming every Sunday to have their Patarak service, but also the period right after the Patarak where you have a conversation with some old friends, people that you haven't seen in a while. If you see some new faces, you introduce yourself. All of those things that keep the Armenian community together. So diving into the specific communities that I was involved with here, the primary research I've been working on is the St. Vartany's church here. I decided to focus more on that because of the more non-religious activities that they also organize and understanding how that makes the Armenian church a little more unique. Where since St. Vartany's has like a close connection with the ARF, for example, they do a lot more events that aren't necessarily religious. Of course, like St. Sahak also does this. So I looked at both communities, but really understanding like what makes the Armenian church different from, let's say, like a Baptist church, and how like the Armenian church has been the center of all things Armenia, where maybe you're not even religious, but you still go to the Armenian church, especially in like smaller communities in Providence. So diving into what I actually did for my research, part of it was archival research with Ahari, of course, but I also looked at census data, which is very interesting, where there's this website called ancestrylibrary.com, where you just search in either a name or in this case, I just searched up Douglas Avenue, Providence, and it gives you any information regarding that in the data. So in this case, I'm looking at the Armenian census, or sorry, the census data of Douglas Avenue by the St. Sahak Church to see where the Armenian community was like located at the time, where the St. Sahak Church was opened in 1914, and this census data of 1910 predates that, so I wanted to see if I could find any Armenians living here. So I'll show you guys in a little bit how I actually found this information. So for example, here it's a lot of different people. I'll show another picture a little later, but basically all of these names aren't Armenian. And then over here we found this Armenian family, the Kamatians. So luckily for me, the Armenian last names are very easy to find. So this took like maybe 30 seconds to find online of where an Armenian family was living. And the census data is actually very in depth in terms of what information people were tracking. So in terms of, as we can see like here, it says, I guess I could show here. Actually, I guess it's a little too zoomed in. But the census data tracks everything from what languages people spoke at home, if they spoke English, where they were born, but also where their father and mother were born. So, for example, here we can see that Martiros Kamatian was the patriarch of this family. He moved to the United States in 1888, with the rest of his family primarily coming in 1904. So this is like an example of how Armenian communities began in Providence, where it's like people starting to move after the Hamidian massacres in the Ottoman Empire and finding a home. So another key aspect of what the census data is tracking is it shows the occupation of what people were working on. So I didn't show it here in this picture, but it says that Martiros worked in a wood mill, and was working like primarily like manual labor jobs. So here's the census data from 1930 on Douglas Avenue. So the same avenue, but we begin to see the centering of the Armenian community here. So you see a lot more Armenian names. Before, it was just the Kamatians on Douglas Avenue, but now we're starting to see many different families living all together. And most notably, it's like you have the foundation of the Armenian Church in 1914 here, so naturally you'll see more Armenians moving to the area, both from immigration from other parts of like Rhode Island, but also new Armenians coming from the Ottoman Empire at that point. So I'll go here to show particularly like what information was here. So this is the Douglas Avenue in 1930. So here we have like the names like occupation, what industry people worked in, their birthplace of like mother, father. We have a couple of people that were like born in Rhode Island, for example. But I guess like connecting this back to the idea of a third place is that the Armenian community was very centered around the church, seeing as how the community became from primarily non-Armenian to now almost entirely Armenian at this point, where we see many, many IAN last names. So here, I could go back to this slide here. Right, so now going into some of the more like artifacts that I found at Ahari that I'm sure many of you guys have seen as well. This was the first Spatarak at Saint Sahak in 1914, where we see an entire community coming together. Everyone's dressed up in their formal attire because of how important the community saw the founding of Saint Sahak. And connecting this back to the idea of a third place is like, this is the prime example of what a third place is where you see a whole community coming together for one event, where you see probably like 100, 200 people in this space, maybe more, who take the time out of their day to connect with their Armenian heritage. And later on, we see that not only does the Armenian community come together for religious purposes, but also just for a picnic. This is from, I forgot the date, but this is also found in Ahari, but we see many glimpses of what the Armenian community was like in the early part of the 1900s, where we see like Armenian musicians here. We see lots of people of different ages, different backgrounds, all coming together with their shared Armenian heritage. Armenians, of course, love their picnics. So here's another example in Goddard Park, for example, in 1927, a group of musicians, but we also have someone who's probably doing some chorovats in the background there. But if we look at the location of where Goddard Park is, I believe it's this area here. So very central to where the Armenian community was, of course, where we have the Armenian church here at Saint Sahak. So naturally, we could assume that the Armenians of this area probably went to Armenian church and then also went to picnics like that to have more fun and show that the community wasn't just centered around religion, but also the activities that stem off of a community that's built upon the church there. Later on, this is a photograph from 1953. We see like the demographics are shifting a little bit more into like an older generation compared to before. We can imagine that a lot of these same people were probably in the community earlier. And it shows that the Armenian community was staying together throughout this time, where Armenians didn't just immigrate from a land far away, but they stayed together with their community. And that was centered around the Armenian church here. Here's a photograph from the St. Vartanant's 40th anniversary book. So explaining like the anniversary books as a concept in general. So the churches every like milestone in terms of when they founded. So like 40th anniversary, they made this book, for example. And they wanted to keep a shared memory of what the church has accomplished, what the community has been through, which included history of the Armenian church in general, but also the Armenian community of Providence. So I took this photograph to focus more on how the church was much more than just a religious center, but also a place for community in general, where you have a basketball team that was formed of Armenians, or Armenian youth group, to see that the Armenian community involves the youth more, that maybe from a young age, people weren't as invested in the religious part of it, but the church, since it was the center of the community, acted in ways that involved people in more than just religion. So basketball, picnics, all of that sort of stuff. Another piece of information that I found at Ahari was these old Ganter announcements that were for the St. Vartanant's community. So these announcements still go today. I think they're online, but I believe they post them in person as well. But these go back until like the 1960s, that every month they would post a series of announcements, updates on the community. There would be like short sermons, like this quote that I put here. And this quote comes from an article titled Quality Time that the priest at St. Vartanant's wrote, that was connecting the idea of that we shouldn't view our relationship with our family as like a quality time, like a set period of our day that we set for spending time with family, but it should be more in terms of like it's a continuous relationship, something that naturally grows and needs constant attention. You can't just dedicate an hour a day to family, for example, and connecting this to the idea of religion and God. But the reason why I'm talking about this is that the Armenian church wasn't just about interpreting religious texts and Christianity, but also connecting the teachings of the Bible, for example, into practical, like everyday life. So the Armenian church understood that their community was more than just religion, but into building a community that's broader than that. Another thing that I found in these Ganter announcements was wish lists, where every month in the magazine that they would put a list of items, whether it's kitchen supplies, a new construction that they're working on for the church, and that they would seek for donations, for volunteers, anything like that. And the existence of like these wish lists were showing that the community is as strong as the individuals that dedicate their time to it. So this is important because the Armenian church, for example, was built upon the dedication of its members. So the fact that they're putting these wish lists up together shows that people were dedicated into this community, and that they were willing to give their own resources into building the community, and that's what shows what like a good, strong third place is. It's like if people are dedicated into being involved in a community, then therefore that community would be stronger because people see more into like why it's important. Another part of the research that I looked into was modern census data. So I looked into the American Community Survey, which is similar to like the censuses that they conduct every 10 years, but these are not for like finding like the population numbers or anything like that. They're looking for more qualitative trends that are shifting. So they ask a lot more questions based off of like ethnicity in terms of things that like you wouldn't see on the like standard census data. So these don't reach out to as many people, but they're asking for more diversity in their responses. So for example, in this one, it was looking of people who say that they're from Armenian ancestry in Rhode Island. And I'm sure like many of you guys already know, most of Rhode Island's Armenian community doesn't live in Providence, which is in contrast to what it was before, where it was like very centered in the Armenian church, like geographically at least. And as the 1950s and 60s suburbanization hit, Armenians, as well as everyone else in Providence, started to move out of the urban centers and live in areas like Cranston or Warwick, places that are further in the suburbs. And yet the Armenian church was still equally as vibrant, where the reason why the Armenian church is a good example of a third place is that people drive from cities that are far away from Providence just to be involved with the community, that they're willing to sacrifice a longer drive to still be involved with the Armenian church. And now the second part of like my research focused more on my own experiences of what I felt going into the church. So again, I'm not necessarily religious, but I still gained a lot from my experience going to church. Where a story that I like to share is that when I first walked into St. Vartany's, I didn't know anyone there. I was just sitting writing my notes in terms of doing like my research for the project. And immediately after the service was finished, I had 3 or 4 different individuals come up to me individually and say, I don't recognize you. Are you new? Where are you from? And just wanted to get to know me. And this shows the strength of the community, that if one individual that they don't recognize walks into the room, they immediately know that that person is new, and that shows that they tend to know everyone that comes into the church. So secondly, that shows the hospitality of the Armenian people, for example, that they want to make sure that people are involved, that they feel accepted into a community, and that they're very involved with making sure that Armenians from across the world are equally as loved as someone from the Providence community. And the anecdote that shows this the most, I would say, is when I was waiting for I was about to call my Uber to go back to campus from the church, and I see a car drive up and park next to me and rolls down the window, and I notice that someone calls out and says, "Excuse me, do you need a ride?" And I assumed that this was Nora Simonian, and for those that know Nora, it's a very Nora thing to do, that she went out of her way to tell someone that is clearly new to the community to offer a ride. I said that I'm calling an Uber, don't worry, and in typical Armenian fashion, that was no use, and she made sure that I got into the car and went back to campus safe. Um, so again, example of why this is a strong third place is why that like people from different communities are coming together to share their Armenian heritage and make sure that they're accepting people of from different cities and making sure that other people are being brought into the community. Um, yeah, so I want to make this a little more conversational, and I want to hear from you guys because the purpose of the talk in general is just showing that from an outside perspective of what the Armenian community looks like, what's the Armenian church looking like. But again, I've only been in Providence for 3 months at this point. I don't know as much as you guys who have lived here maybe your whole lives or a significant portion of your lives in Providence or in Rhode Island. So I want to hear from you. I have these two questions here that I'd love for you guys to unmute and share your thoughts. So first off, what other communities in Providence, like I don't know, like other like ethnic communities, do you feel have a strong connection to their cultural heritage? Um, so whoever has a thought, go ahead and speak. I can't. Um, Margaret, do you want to chime
Yes, I
in?
think one for sure is the Cape Verdean community. Many of whom don't live in Providence anymore, probably, but like us, they started out in Providence. And I know they have a museum, they have a cultural organization, they have a big festival every year, so they're very strongly connected. And there's not many Cape Verdeans outside of New England, so it's important for them to keep their culture going as it is for us.
Definitely in Providence, you definitely notice the Cape Verdean community. And what do you think keeps them tied to their community of
Food.
food? Yes,
It's the food and the music.
food and music, and
I don't
that's
associate them
same
with a
for
particular church. There is a little church in Fox Point that's primarily Cape Verdean, but it's not like the Armenian church. When you think of Cape Verdean, you immediately think of a church.
Mhm.
It's more of a cultural community.
Yeah, I've definitely realized that too, especially in Fox Point. There's not as many Cape Verdeans as there used to be. Um, but yeah, I think the connection to food and music also ties to that. And from what I've noticed in the Armenian community here, you guys love food and music too, with all of the Armenian markets and all of that. Any other communities that you guys have noticed? Pauline?
Hi, Eric. It's so nice to see you. Um we had a conversation many months ago ourselves, which was really
Yeah.
it's nice to actually, see you on this in this format. So my experience, I'll talk traditionally. The Italian community has a very, very strong connection to or has traditionally had a very strong connection to their cultural heritage. Again,
Mhm.
there are festivals, food, music, the whole thing. Federal Hill was traditionally Italian for many, many years. I'm not so sure it's 100% Italian anymore, but there's more diversity on Federal Hill now. But the Italian community, I had a lot of interaction with in one of my jobs, and they have organizations and associations as well that sort of help them to stay connected with one another. And most of the Italians that I came across are Catholic, so they have a connection to their Catholic churches. Um, and so I think that they've, remained connected both through their churches and through the organizations. But of course, that's a much, that's a huge community, the Italian community. And I think you'll find that with a lot of the ethnicities in the city, that there's been strong connections and that there are, that they have churches that they center their lives around, and they also have community organizations that help them stay centered in their culture as well.
Definitely. Like it's when you think of Providence and you think of the Italians, it's like they go hand in hand. Um, and especially I've been reading more of the Federal Hill area, and when I've talked to different Italians that of like like a slightly older generation, they always connect to the Holy Ghost Church in Federal Hill, and the church there also organized, like very similar to the Armenian church, that they organize like these big cultural events that are not just religious, of course, that they connect people back to their Italian, Sicilian culture. And those are the memories that people remember for the rest of their lives, that they share the food with new people, they hear the Italian music, and all of that beautiful stuff. Any other communities that you guys have noticed? Um,
I just want to come out and talk a little bit about the relationship between the various churches in Rhode Island, for Rhode Island, for Providence. And if you go back and take a look 20 years ago or 30 years ago, 50 years ago, you'll find that there were all sorts of problems, all sorts of issues between the churches, not only for uh, for uh, uh, uses as churches, but as uses centers for political needs. And the political issues pop up, which show differences in organization, association, and the change that has taken place in the past 20 years. You know, and I was brought up here a long time ago. I'm probably the oldest oldest guy in the organizations around here. I'm very, very close to 98 ages and 98 years here. So I go back and I look at what's what happened in Rhode Island. It happened in other places. These political organizations split really the churches. In fact, the reason that there was the three Armenian churches was the fact it was a political situation that caused them to step apart. That all has come together like a miracle over the past 20 years. And I was grown up to hate the other church, membership of that church. I was brought up that I was not able to go into the other churches, only the church that I was at. All of that was political. And if you want to dig in deeper to further that and see what happened, the people that you're talking to now recognize that, we're all Armenians, we're all the same basic fundamental churches. And that is really brought back the Armenian community in Rhode Island. There's a lot to be said. I think if you're interested looking into the background and things that took place, I would be glad to sit down with you and give you my views from where I looked at it and for the things that started it and so forth. It just startles me that we have such complement people, such people working together under the fact that there are Armenians wasn't operational 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So a lot has changed. And I like the way you're looking at what maybe the churches did do and what have you, and as I say, I'd more than get with you. Just if you wanted more information.
Yeah,
Well, Eric,
I'd love to sit down and talk more.
I was just gonna say, Eric, you need to take him up on that.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be amazing. That's a resource, probably absolutely totally unique.
yeah, of course. I'll send you send an email after the meeting so we could schedule a time to meet in person. I'd love to come down and talk more about this topic with you. That'd be great. I guess like building off of like the what you were talking about more the separation between the churches and the schism that happened in the 20th century. I've found it really interesting that the Armenian church is probably one of the only churches that I've heard of that have had this schism within the same community where you have like the schism between Protestants and Catholics, but that doesn't mean like that's more about the interpretation of what should be done with whether Christ and all that sort of stuff. But in terms of the split of the community, like half and half between like Saint Vartany and Saint Sahak, for example. But also, what I've talked to many people throughout the research is that when you ask what is like the biggest problem with the Armenian community, is that people point to this schism of the churches that it's divided, even though Armenians are so passionate about their heritage. But I've wondered if you guys think that the split has hindered or preserved overall the Armenian identity. So has the split of the church made it so that people are more passionate about their Armenian issues, that there's almost like a free market where it's like there's competition, so therefore both people are trying to be more passionate about their Armenian identity, and they're trying to organize the better events, the better markets, so that there's two options where people could go to the Saint Sahak or Saint Vartanants? Or do you think that it's if it was a united community, it would be stronger? I'm curious of that.
I've explored both options, Eric,
Uh-huh.
and a member of both churches, and I see what I see though when you said trying to make comparisons, other splits in other communities. Any one of us, no matter what our church, could drift into the problems with the Cambodian community, the Laotian community, and the Vietnamese community, because they all have splits as well. And in so much that being said, it's all on the basis of the acceptance of the past versus the present day status of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. And we can talk to them from our experience, which is the oldest experience and the oldest split, and talk about everything with the indifferent. I mean, it's very, very heated in their communities. But one of the biggest things when you were talking about this competition and stuff is that they're losing their children. The assimilation of their children is off the charts. And I remembered listening to a Vietnamese poet at MIT, and I'll leave you with this thought, is no matter what it is, he said, for all of us that came here as immigrants, I like to have a big enough net that I can throw it back and haul in my entire past. So that being said, I don't think that there's anything worth value in the split, especially these days where it doesn't show up. And I also appreciate the time of the genocide. I was with Aram Garabedian, and there's a Whipple Street, and I'm sure you know about Whipple Street, which is now Aram Garabedian Way. There's a staffer from the Rhode Island School of Design named Venebeck, Bob Venebeck, and he's bought all those houses. And as you showing who was the residents here back in even before the genocide, he went through that, and he's preserved the history of like the number of the bachelors that came here to send money back to Armenia. But he's also taken the fences down between the properties, their backyards, so you can do a walk through the gardens that they planted, that kind of thing. And I hope someday he could, again, to introduce you to him, and he can come and speak as well to Ahari.
That would be fantastic. That's so interesting to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't looked into the Cambodian Vietnamese lost like those communities. I'd definitely like to look into that.
I'd like to just make a notation that brings all of this together, parts of it. Back in the 1930s, the French, which were ample organizations and churches in Rhode Island, went into a situation where they had to split. And it was somewhere six churches in Rhode Island that broke communications back in 1930s with this, and they finally came together again. And this was almost the Armenians with the, from the period of the 1930 right up into 1990. We were set apart. We wouldn't talk with each other, and that's all gone away. This organization that we have now, the is pasted an organization for all Armenians, and took a big step in communications and organizations, all of it looking at the Armenians in Rhode Island.
Pauline and Margaret, or Margaret and Pauline, whatever.
Thank you. I won't take a lot of time, but I thought I would just address this. It's very interesting the way you phrased the question, Eric. The question is whether the division has helped or hindered the preservation of Armenian identity. And I really was thinking about that as people were talking. And I'm not sure either of those words really accurately would reflect anything to do with the division, because in my view, of course, I wasn't around when it started, so I didn't experience what Mr. Cadence experienced, or that generation experienced. And believe me, we've all heard about those stories from, people of that generation, of that time. But I will say that regardless of the churches, Armenian identity and Armenian culture has been preserved, and each church served a purpose. And I think that's important to recognize. I happen to be a member of Saint Vartan's church. Many of my friends are members of Saint Sahag's, Sahag and Mesrog Church, and I think each church sort of has lifted up a certain part of the Armenian identity. And I think that they both have served a purpose. And then, of course, the Protestant church has as well, in a very meaningful way. My husband was raised Protestant and in the Protestant church. So that church has a great value in the community as well. So I think that each of the churches and church communities has lent its own way of preserving our culture and our identity in very important and meaningful ways. So I'm not sure if that helps to answer your question, but to me, there's been value in the entire Armenian community in their own ways and in meaningful ways. So, I mean, you noted the organizations that you saw at Saint Vartan's Church and at Saint Sahag and Mesrop Church. There are other organizations. So I think, they've all really helped. And as Mr. Karen said, now we have Ahari, which is central to the community and offers so much in terms of preserving our culture and our identity.
Margaret,
Maybe speaking of the way that the question was phrased, maybe it'd be a very different question if the word identity was replaced with community, because maybe they're two different parts of that division.
Mm.
Yeah, it seems I'm from Massachusetts. I can't speak to any of that, but it seems the identity is very much preserved. And as you say, Pauline, very, very important pieces from each of them. But I also heard the gentleman say we didn't speak to some people in those churches. So, maybe the identity versus community are two very different questions of that, in that particular that specific question anyway.
okay, Margaret,
I did want to throw out the Greek community is very connected to their heritage as well. But I wanted to make a correction. Being a librarian, I have to do this. Goddard Park is a park in Warwick or East Greenwich on the ocean. It's a beautiful, beautiful setting. How these men even got out there back in the day, I have no idea. But it's not in Providence.
Okay, that's
Adol
better.
Park.
Thank you for correcting that.
they piled into other different cars.
Those drums, did you see those?
No seat belt rules, so they could put as many people in the car as they could.
Mhm.
The rumble seat.
And by
That's
the
right.
way,
I forgot. No seatbelts. Oh my goodness. That's right. We used to pile in.
yeah,
Ay, ay,
yep.
ay.
And
Sit on laps and everything.
yeah, and that the photograph was actually one of the, I want to say, the Armenian organizations. They were from Kasadek, and Varujan's father is from Kasadek, and a part of Hartbert. And so they would get together and have picnics, and they would raise money, and they would do. It was quite amazing. That too, those compatriotic organizations were also part of the glue that really pulled people together. Really are very strong. I mean, we keep trying to find material because they all kept very clear notes and everything. We can't find anything. They must have thrown it out. Their kids maybe threw it in the nearest dumpster, but those compatriotic, every fuel, every little town had a picnic in the summer at Hyastein Camp or Camp Maynard, wherever. It was really quite amazing. And hundreds, if not thousands of people would show up, especially the big picnic, aka the Hotbitsy picnic.
I wanted to say a few things too. Eric, by the way, thank you for the presentation. I like your approach. I like your studies and research. The second part of your the paragraph that's up right now about do you think the division with the church helped or hindered? I'm always in the philosophy of, it's a slogan, Armenians united will never be defeated. So I want to start there. I think as a perspective from a sociological way, in my opinion, the turn of the century, the genocide and communities and survival, those slogans were starving Armenians, etc. But there was the Turian assassination in 33. A lot of the split of the church happened, community split. In my opinion, actually, assimilation factors were prevented by having these splits. And I'm not promoting that. And I like what Varujan, Mr. Karen said, last 15, 20, 30 years, we don't see those anymore because of the replenishment of the new generation and a lot of the the staunch kind of hatred to each other and all this is kind of washed away. The new generation has come a long way, but in the bottom line is I think that it did not hinder. It actually helped each community in their division. Unfortunately, particles kept everything tighter, and there was less assimilation, less loss of especially in Rhode Island. And I'm a newcomer here. I mean, last three decades or so. I grew up mostly in New York, but that's the way I see it. And I see that also in various parts of the world. So I just wanted to mention that. And thank you for your presentation and research.
Yeah,
Well,
thank
Eric,
you. Oh, go ahead, whoever was talking.
Eric, I wanted to echo what Berg said is thank you very much for doing this. And you have in front of you two Armenian treasures in Pauline and Mr. Kadens. You really should, if you really want to delve into the history of Providence and the history of the Armenian community here, you couldn't have picked two better people to participate in this. And I, much like Berg, moved here from New York in the 70s. And I remember playing softball against other Armenian churches and having fist fights around the fifth inning, and that would always happen. And we have become more cordial, and all the churches have become more cordial towards each other. However, I have a little different spin that I feel it's been a detriment to have different churches hold on to their identities at the expense of the Armenian identity. And our strength is in numbers, like Berg said, and I think we do a disservice. And the examples are all around us where one Armenian school has 20 kids and the other Armenian school has 20 kids, and one of them can't put on a dance class because they don't have enough girls or whatever. And those are the losses. You can't field the baseball team because you don't have 9 guys from the same church. And those are the penalties. We do hold on, to our identity, but in one of my visits to Armenia, I had a tour guide and we were traveling through the countryside, and he would volunteer or I would ask, what is this village known for? And one was wine, and one was, they had best musicians, and this one had the best pomegranates. And we came upon a village, and I said, what's this village known for? And he goes, stubborn people. And I think that's really tells the story where none of the churches or none of the groups that we have in Rhode Island want to give up anything. They don't want to give up the little bit for the good of the mass. And another trip to Armenia, I was there during elections, and there were 26 political parties. I don't think there's 26 issues, and that's to our detriment. And I think we've gone from fist fighting to cordiality, and maybe in the future we'll get together even a little closer.
Yeah, we have to be pan-Armenian. We have to look at what unites us versus what divides us.
I'd like to pick up on something that Johnny mentioned, and I was going to talk about the Baku community. And at Brown right now is a professor of English. Can you imagine a Baku refugee who came here not speaking a word of English, gets into Brown, gets a master's degree, and teaches English at Brown? But you'll never see them, and for quite a bit, a lot of the Baku community, because they go, where's the unity? They just, and especially it doesn't matter if there's a march, that we're all on the same cause, but half the community is present. And I'm talking to the leaders of the Baku community. It's funny. There was a lot of us that worked with them and helped them, but the inverse of what I was talking about with the Cambodians, because the Baku community came here after their genocide, the Cambodian communities led them. As a matter of fact, there was a banquet at St. James in Watertown, and all the Baku community from all over the Northeast attended, and the keynote speaker was Chaim Sip. a Cambodian community that came here as refugees and formed their own organization and so on. And so the Baku community is a very interesting aspect. And I have loved and endeared brown students, now including yourself, that came here, whether they were in pre-med and came to St. Sahag regularly as students. And I'm one of the vice presidents of the Armenian Students Association. If you ever need scholarship money, you know. But also, going to college and going to church works very, very well. When I was in the thick of it, I would never miss church. And so there was one fella from Troy. He was pre-med, and the Turks attacked our monument, Turkish club at Brown. He went to the Bursar's office. He got all their phone numbers. We got on a radio station. We negotiated with the PBS station, and we asked the Turks to come out of the dock and face us. And I've got that tape of the newscast, and I love to play it on one of our April 24th events. We read their letter that they put on all the cars on the east side, knocking our monument on its dedication, and they never called, even though we called them and said, listen to this radio station. But the public throughout the state on this very popular radio program called in and just said, what, great stuff, Armenian community, for doing what you've done. And another one that's an environmental economics master's. She came to St. Vartany's church and she sang in the choir and she also taught Armenian school. So there's a lot of richness and we certainly can use another organization on the campus at Brown. We've had them, they come and go, but we want to have something more permanent going on. Such a charge to you.
Okay, we're close to the hour now. Any other comments, questions, concerns, anything from anyone? Eric, this was really wonderful. Thank you so much. And we hope you'll come back to Ahari and do more research or come to our activities, etc. Really.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the help in terms of going through the archives and for organizing this event today.